Look, we can complain about that penalty all we want, but the truth of the matter is Boston College got beat badly in the trenches.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black of Eagle Insider. I'm your host every single day. We do this 5 days a week here on Locked On Boston College. And after a game, we always have Mitch Wolf of Eagle Insider to join us to break down the game, give his thoughts and his takeaways from Saturday's loss in the Pinstripe Bowl. BC loses to Nebraska 20-15. It took a valiant effort at the end to make this much of a game, as 3/4 of this was dominated by the Cornhuskers. But we're going to talk about what really did turn this game. It wasn't the penalty. It was more other things going on in between the trenches for Boston College. So here's Mitch. Mitch, how's it going?
Oh, going as well as can be anticipated after watching that slog, which again, I think we might as well just make this the tagline of the podcast, is no more football games in baseball stadiums.
That's my show tomorrow. So teaser right now, I'm supposed to tease my future episodes, is no more football games in baseball stadiums. So check out Locked On Boston College in the morning. Anyway.
You think we can get Friends of the Heights to print some t-shirts?
Oh man, I could also make some of my own. So, all the talk from a lot of fans have been about that penalty. And I said, my two thoughts about it. I thought it was bogus, but it's bang, bang. Sometimes they call it, sometimes they don't. But when you take a step back, you look at what caused Boston College to win and lose this game. Mitch, you have a theory or a philosophy of what wins games for college football teams and what is and NFL teams.
Well,
and high school teams and any team. What is it that wins games?
It's not even really my philosophy. It's what Bill O'Brien has been saying in those videos that BC football posts on social media before or after every single game. And he says one phrase repeatedly: dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And for the most part, BC has did that for most of this season against equally or lesser talented opponents. Against Syracuse, they did it. Against UNC, against Pitt, against obviously Florida State, probably probably a more talented team, just didn't feel like playing football this year. Michigan State, Western Kentucky to an extent. And, sometimes they had some struggles with that. And in this game, if you compare that team that played during the regular season to the team that played in the Pinstripe Bowl, there's a lot of differences in the trenches. So obviously on defense, you're missing Cam Horsley, who was your best run defender for most of the year. He kind of had some injuries in the last part of the year, which led to him opting out in this game. Totally fair. And you're missing Donovan Ezeiruaku, who was the ACU Defensive Player of the Year, best defensive end in college football this year, based on the Hendricks Award, and probably had the most impressive statistical season for a BC defender since Zach Allen, Harold Landry, or Matt Milano or something. So you're missing those two guys. And we talk a lot about the next man up mentality, and that's a mentality you can have and you should have. But you have to accept the reality that going from Donovan Ezeiruaku to Neto Ekpala, who had a pretty decent game, actually, there is a drop-off in the performance you're going to get from those players, regardless of their effort. And if they do perform up to that standard, that's fantastic, because it's very unlikely. On the other side of the ball, after Drew Kendall started the game and then got an injury and said, no, I'm done with this, which, again, I think that's totally fair, given that, honestly, I think he should have just opted out from the beginning, and I'll get back to that. But you're missing 4 of 5 stars in the offensive line because Jude Bowry's hurt, Ozzy Trapilo has opted out, Drew Kendall essentially opts out, and Jack Conley opts out. So Logan Taylor's your only remaining starter. He makes the start at left tackle. They bump him inside to left guard after a drive or so. And that group is just not getting the push in the run game. And again, part of it is because, like I said, Nebraska has 2 exceptionally good run-stuffing defensive tackles in Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson, who, when you are going from you have 2 first-team All-ACC offensive linemen in Drew Kendall and Ozzy Trapilo, and even Jack Conley was an ACC honorable mention, who's a big guy. You're going from them to Dwayne Alec, who has only played 25 career snaps at center. You're playing, I guess, Ryan McCow at right tackle, or Kevin Klein at right tackle, who had a pretty decent game, I will say. And Eric Stockerty, who's a converted defensive lineman who has been okay in garbage time this year. You're kind of interested what he can be in the future, but this isn't really a good matchup for him in his first start at the offensive line, where he's playing 2 very good defensive tackles. And they couldn't move the ball at all. BC had a 20% rushing success rate and a negative 0.5 EPA per rush. So every time they ran the ball, they were losing half an expected point, which is crazy considering how good BC was running the ball this season. I'll try to pull up some numbers for that for context. But all in all, BC couldn't do what they've been able to do all throughout the season. And at the end of the day, it's because the team was different, because the roster was very different. They were missing their best players. And I'm not saying this is an excuse. I'm just providing context to say, like, when you have different players, when you have worse players, it would be unfair to expect the same results. When you're a team like BC, when you're a team like Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, you can probably expect similar results. But when you're BC and you're kind of going down the depth chart, you are experiencing a significant drop off in talent. And even though you have 2 weeks to prepare for it, with between the last or 2 or 3 weeks to prepare for it, there's just sometimes talent level thresholds that you're just not going to be able to clear.
Right. And when you're looking at this roster, and it's, I think another piece you may go to, oh, well, then why didn't Bill O'Brien have these guys ready? Why weren't they ready? They've had a month. I think there's something to be said, too, that this is still Jeff Hafley's roster. These are not fully Bill O'Brien's guys, and you want to make sure in the future that you're building that depth. And I think that's what O'Brien is trying to do. But right now, even going into this season, every game that we talked about with Donovan Ezeiruaku, we said, if he goes down, who's going to step up and play for him? Because I didn't see much and there.
Even, and like you said, Quintavious Hutchins went out for a few plays. So then you're looking at Neto Ekpala and Jason Flint, who I think he didn't play at all this year, except maybe
he's a true freshman.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think he actually had like some nice plays, so that's good for the future. But they're like putting these guys in situations where it's very tough for them. And again, like, one thing I always say about them, I think this will be the case for BC next year on the offensive line, is that in college, it's very good to have older offensive lines because you have guys who are 23, 24, even 25 years old sometimes, and they're playing against 19 and 20-year-olds. And the inverse of that was true for Nebraska versus BC offensive line, where they had 22, 23, maybe 24-year-olds in Hutmacher and Robinson against a guy like Eric Stockerty, who, is a redshirt freshman. Yeah.
Yep.
And I say all this to say that, like, a guy like Logan Taylor, who was the only remaining starter, he had a pretty rough game. He had the play where they had the play action pass where they pull him from left to right, and he was kind of sitting in the hole and kind of looking around, looking for work. And then a delayed blitz for the linebacker ends up in a sack for Grayson James. So, like, I think Logan Taylor is a pretty good player. I don't really think you want him to be your best offensive lineman. You want to hope that you can have better guys around him. And so we can talk about this, we'll have months to talk about it. But I think when this group is healthy and they have, an entire spring to prep, and ideally, like you said, I think you really just need like one solid guy in the portal, just kind of not put other guys in tough positions. But I think you can put together a pretty decent group on the line going into next year.
Yeah, because you're getting Jude Bowry back. That poor soul, hopefully he's back to 100%. Because,
and honestly, I think they do need a plan for if him missing time, because he does get hurt a lot. So you've got him at the left tackle, probably going to keep Logan Taylor at left guard. Center is a bit weird. Alec had a lot of snapping issues. I imagine if you train him at center over the entire offseason, he could be better. I think Otto Hess and Michael Krause, the two backups there.
Yeah, there's the other two that are
right guard. I think what they should do is they should kick Kevin Klein inside to right guard and then have Ryan McCow play right tackle, because I think McCow is kind of like Bowry, where he's a tackle only guy because he's a little thinner, better athlete, not as strong. And I think that group, especially again with an offseason training, and maybe you find a center in the portal from, a really good one from a MAC school or an American Athletic Conference, something like that. If you can find one like that, then that'd be great. But I think you could figure something out where you get those guys, that five going. And I think you could also build a different offense around Grayson James where you don't put as much pressure on the offensive line, make it easier with more quick passes, which we'll talk about this later as well. But I thought, honestly, Will Loring did a pretty good job of calling a game where they were trying to take some pressure off the offensive line. They had a ton of screen passes, more than they've had like the entire season. And a lot of them worked pretty well, which the screen game was a real sore spot for this team for most of the season. And this game, they had a lot of big plays off it. So that was something that I was like, okay, well, this was a bad game, but there were some silver linings to find to talk about.
Speaking of Will Long, in a moment, Mitch and I are going to talk about some of the challenges they had, the red zone issues, and all the play of the offense. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even your goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has saved over 5 million users at an average of total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't even using anymore, and I've saved a ton of money. Plus, with their goals features, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Locked On Boston College, AJ Black here of Eagle Insider, and we're talking about the Pinstripe Bowl. This is our second episode. If you have not already checked it out, you can go back to the Locked On Boston postcast if you want to see the YouTube, or go to our podcast feed. It's loaded up there from Saturday's game. I went live after that. Now, Mitch, the offense did not score until late in this game, but they were able to move the balls between the ball in the middle of the field. They just struggled to get it into the end zone. What talk about Will Long's game and how Grayson James did, and I know with the running game was completely non-existent. What happened in this one?
Yeah, I want to bring up that EPA stat again because I think they updated the number because now it's negative 0.44 EPA per rush, and if in the last 3 years, going back to 2022, that is the third worst EPA per rush in a single game by BC. The other two are 2022 games against Virginia Tech, which was negative 0.53, and NC State in 2022, which was ironically a win, but it was negative 0.77. So, terrible number. And again, it's because the offensive line was much similar to that group in 2022 than it was for the last 2 years. So that's part of it. Again, this entire team is based around running the ball. They couldn't do that because of the changes on the offensive line. They kept trying at times, and there were a few plays that were like, okay, but really just not enough to really lean on. That forces you to kind of abandon the run, especially once you get down by multiple scores, which allows Nebraska's defensive line, which is still missing some of their best pass rushers, but they can pin their ears back and not have to worry about defending the run. So that leads to those pressures and sacks. And I haven't watched the film yet because my film is the film guy I have is having some trouble getting it downloaded. Excuse me. But watching the game, it didn't really seem like BC's guys were necessarily just getting physically manhandled or beaten with technique. There was a lot of issues with just like communicating pass protection changes and guys not going the right place. Also, one of the sacks was a low snap by Dwayne Alec that Grayson James had to kneel down to get it. So that was a sack, but not really anybody's fault in the offensive line besides Alec for a bad snap. But I mentioned that play with Taylor where he, they didn't really pass that off well. And a lot of those pressures you could see like guys weren't really in the right place. And that's because you're playing your backup center because your starter goes out. You're playing a lot of backups who are not as familiar with the calls and aren't going to make mistakes. So you kind of have this cascading effect of where not being able to run the ball affects everything, and then the issues that you're experiencing with the changes in the roster and all that are exacerbated just based on the game script and how things are going. So again, there was only so much Will Long could do because of how much the run game was struggling. Again, I had some issues with certain of his play calls. Honestly, the one that I didn't like the most was the 4th and 1 that failed, where they went with their heavy personnel and I didn't like it because they ran it. I didn't not like it because they ran it out of the shotgun. I didn't like it because they were trying to run up the middle with a backup offensive line against a team that had been stuffing them up the middle all day. Of course, that play had a blatantly missed legal hands to face penalty where Jeremiah Franklin got his helmet ripped off and line judge just completely ignored it. So that was cool. But I digress. Anyway, so you see all these things happen, and I think the game plan of having the screen passes was good because if Nebraska's going to blitz, they're going to aggressively get upfield to try to sack the quarterback. You have the offensive line let them go, leak out to the side, you throw it to the screen, and then you get a decent gain out of it. And I thought Grayson James, for the most part, and again, I haven't watched the film, so I haven't seen like kind of how many guys were open on some plays, but just watching, it's like, okay, this guy's making some tough throws, making some good throws over the middle, making some good scrambles to keep drives alive. So that was impressive. And especially in the red zone, you would have these situations where BC would get the ball there and then they'd have a sack or a penalty or something. And so it's like, these are like, again, they're like detail issues where, maybe if you have all 5 starters in the offense line, you're not seeing some of these issues. And I'm not trying to be reductive by saying this is all this fault, but this cascades into multiple areas that cause problems. And so, BC would, like you said, would move the ball well once they got the ball. And then, one thing would set them back and then they're in a bad situation where they have to throw the ball. So again, I don't think this was necessarily Will Long's fault. I didn't think this was his worst game by any means. I think there were still mistakes, but I don't really put this one necessarily on the coaches or, lack of preparation. It's just sometimes like in this case, like Nebraska just had the better roster. And they were just more, and not that they were more prepared. They were in a better position to take advantage of BC's absences.
I want to bring it up because I don't think I did a good job of talking about his play in the post game recap, but it was really nice to see Turbo Richard back out there.
Yes,
I know he did not play; he was suited but didn't play against Pitt, and he was back with whatever injury, but he looked 100% out there. I wanted to say too, like he didn't obviously do a whole lot after that first screen pass that he took for like 50 plus yards, but it was tantalizing to see what the future of the running back position is going to look like, because he and I really am looking forward to next year with him and McDonald being the 1-2 punch, and maybe we'll see what Alex Broom is, to kind of fill that Trayshawn Ward spot. But what were your thoughts about the backs, given that really there was no push through that whole game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the box score now. You have Jordan McDonald, 3 rushes for -1 yard and a touchdown. Turbo with the Jerome Bettis stat line. You have Turbo Richard, 4 rushes for 7 yards with a touchdown, and Kai Robichaux, 10 rushes for 19 yards. And then you have Grayson James, 9 rushes for 22, which I think there was only one designed rush that I can remember. Most of those were scrambles, so not really part of the running game. And then Turbo Richard obviously has that 50-yard screen pass, so good to see. Yeah, I mean, that's a really encouraging position group going into next year. You kind of have a lot of different types of bodies. Like you have this explosive threat with Richard. You have your big bruiser with McDonald. If Alex Broom comes back, you have a guy that is, a bit more of an explosive kind of scat back type, who also has been, in previous years had been pretty good in pass protection. That's something that BC struggled with at times this year. But if he can kind of fill out the role that Trayshawn Ward was filling earlier in the year, and it's kind of weird that he just wasn't in this game, I imagine maybe he opted out as well. But yeah, I think you've got 3 running backs there, and then you've got obviously the young guys. Datriel Jones played a little bit here and there, but then you've got the 2 freshman running backs that are coming in that are pretty exciting. So that is probably one of the more encouraging position groups on this team going into next year.
Alex Broom's is an interesting character because, like, a lot of times when guys get hurt, you see them sometimes on the field. Alex Broom was at every practice, he was there all the time. And so I think he's just Jones going to get back out there. And then obviously the true freshmen, I think, are going to be exciting to watch for as well. All right. In our last segment, Mitch and I are going to go over our last thoughts on this Pinstripe Bowl, a game that I think is really tough to get huge takeaways in terms of the 2024 season, and more on a preview of what 2025 might look like. But even then it's hard. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. This is AJ Black, editor and publisher of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 Network, and host of Locked On Boston College. And we're here with Mitch Wolf. When you're done with this episode, your second listen of the day should be Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. He talks everything college football, and with the playoffs and Bulls rolling and the transfer portal heating up, you got to check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Now, Mitch, any other last thoughts? I know you have a thing that I don't think any BC fan wants to hear, but what were your thoughts on Matt Turn's game here?
I think you'd be hard pressed to say this wasn't his best game as a special teams coordinator, because if you're willing to accept that, and again, this is the theory that I've posited all year, the poor kicking in and of itself it's not up to him. It just is what it is. It's, a BC mismanaging of the kicker and punter position on the roster. That's a separate problem. Thurin is more concerned with the blocking and coverage operations for kickoffs and punts and kick returns and such. And aside from, not missing on a fake punt on the one drive where, BC got caught up position and Nebraska converted on 4th down, you got a stuffed fake, you got a blocked extra point for a 2-point conversion, and a blocked punt for returning a touchdown 1 or 2 plays later that, kept BC in this game. And, Nebraska couldn't really do anything otherwise with punts and kicks. BC, I think, had 1 or 2. Had 1 good kick return. So looking at the results of this on the average, like especially because compared to the rest of the season, it's been pretty bad. If you include punting and kicking still, I mean, and again, kicking a 40+ yard field goal in these conditions, like, that's not really Matt Thurin or even really Liam Connor's fault for missing that. That's just, I mean, they shouldn't have gone for that. I mean, I can't remember the down distance exactly, but it's just like, we knew what was going to happen. Like, we knew it was going to be a missed field goal. And then the one punt was bad. And it's, again, like, you'd be in the definition of sanity is doing the same over and over again, expecting different results. There's no reason to expect why BC's punting, even with a month to prepare for this game. There's no reason to think that it would just magically improve over time. So that is what it is. regarding my other thoughts on the defense, if you allow 20 points, that's winning. That's a winning football game. You can win by only allowing those amount of points. The offense needed to be better. I thought they did a decent job of limiting Raiola and the Nebraska offense. Again, considering they're missing their two best players that are integral to their philosophy of defense, that's a big problem. I thought Raiola only hit on that one big pass on the first drive. Other than that, he wasn't really that effective throwing downfield. Next time he did try to throw downfield, he threw an interception on the sideline to KP Price, which was sick. Tim Lewis blitzed on, I think, 53% of Raiola's dropbacks, which is just some absolute mad lad stuff, and I can't help but respect it. Again, didn't really have a lot of luck getting home because you're missing Ezeiruaku. So they bumped it up to 62.5%. That is nuts. And they only got one sack out of it and only pressured on 31% of dropbacks. So, I strictly tried to do because with the guys you're playing corner, you hope that by blitzing more, you can get some quick pressure, but Nebraska was just, really good at stopping it and not allowing it to really affect Raiola. And Raiola made some nice plays to get out of the pocket, buy time, and, still throw downfield, or at least, get rid of the ball so it wasn't a massive loss. With the penalties issue, I think Nebraska was actually penalized more than BC on the whole game. So that you kind of not that makes it any different because,
yep.
And you look at like the replay reviews, and I think the one I disagreed with was the Dino Tomlin scoop up catch. I thought he pretty clearly had, and I think BC ended up getting. I don't know if they scored on that drive. That might have been the one where they failed on fourth down. So I can't remember, but that's one where I thought he had his hands under it and before it hit the ground, so it was a catch. I was wrong. The illegal hands to face penalty is the worst miscall in my opinion of the game. You talk extensively about the Raiola Carter Davis,
penalty, not KP Price.
And I totally agree with you. This is a problem in all levels of football where quarterbacks are sliding too late, and frankly, putting themselves in more danger by doing so. You obviously think about the Kenny Pickett fake slide from when he was at Pitt. We saw Trevor Lawrence get basically knocked out for the season in the NFL this year, where he kind of slid a little bit late, and the defender. I mean, it was kind of a headhunting play still, but you don't. I'm not sure how you resolve this issue. Maybe you have some kind of thing where it's like, if the quarterback initiates his slide within a certain yardage of the defender, then it's not. You basically lose your protection. Again, I'm not sure how you solve it, but that. I can't fault the refs for throwing the flag because by the letter of the law, that is a flag, but it's just, it's the quarterbacks taking advantage of the rule to try to draw flags. It's, essentially the Joe Flacco underthrow the deep ball to draw pass interference strategy.
Yep.
And interestingly, that didn't, I think, the timeline of the end of the game was because at that point, you kind of figured it was over, but actually BC did force a fourth down where Raiola did slide to make it 4th and 2, and then BC allowed a big run and then it was over. So again, I think this comes back to just, BC didn't have the horses to compete in this game. I know, Nebraska had opt-outs and transfer portal and whatnot. Well, actually, I don't know if they really had that many opt-outs, but again, I think just the number of ones for BC and where they played just really changed the tenor of the game, where they couldn't. And I do have to wonder, maybe if this game, of course, if this game was played at a better location with better weather, with a better field, maybe BC is more willing to throw the ball a little more and they can overcome that issue. But it's when you have a game like this in these conditions, you want to run the ball because, you're worried about, weird plays happen with the pass game where guys drop the ball or the wind or receiver slips and there's an interception. So again,
that's how BC won their last year against
exactly.
Totally crappy weather, and SMU was the more pass heavy team and they couldn't pass.
Yeah.
And BC just ran the ball down their throat and won it.
Exactly. This cuts both ways. And, again, because of the minor, not minor, but detail oriented mistakes that put BC in bad situations in the red zone when they had the ball. They couldn't capitalize with points in the red zone, which allowed Nebraska to just kind of keep getting more cracks at it. And, they were able to weather those 2 early turnovers. And I will say, I think their last touchdown came off the Grayson James fumble. So they had a short field there, and that's where BC has really struggled. And, we've talked a lot about this year, how this team is a bend don't break defense. And that's, it's had sometimes, I think for the most part it worked this year. Sometimes they had some bad games with it, but basically when you remove a guy like Donovan Ezeiruaku, another guy like Cam Horsley, you're removing, 2 of the proverbial sticks that are bending. So it's easier for the rest of the sticks to break, right. to continue that analogy forward. And this is a little unfair, but it's if you want to keep carrying that out, you're missing guys like Cam Arnold and Amari Jackson, who are good players, who are leaders on this team. And they've been gone for a good portion of the season. So it's not exactly fair, but it's like, then again, you're reaching down the depth chart. And, this is a pretty rough game for Max Tucker, who, again, Jamal Banks just killed BC again. Like, I think he's out of eligibility. So BC doesn't have to play him again because, man, that guy's a good receiver and he just always gives us problems.
So I think that the big takeaway is maybe there's some takeaways for the 2025 season of things that maybe you want to look at, things that you're like.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is don't get wrapped up in taking this bowl game as a microcosm, or don't overinflate the importance of this bowl game to erase what was good about this season and prevent thinking that there are good things to come in 2025.
There you go. You put it much more succinctly than I could have there, Mitch, because I think that's exactly what I was going for. Like, it's just not. It's again, it's a glorified exhibition. Almost.
We talked about this when we found out where the bowl game was. The bowl game can be whatever you want it to be in terms of an argument of rhetoric, where it's like, if BC had won this game, we would be saying, oh, this is a credit to the coaching staff for having the depth, and depending on how they won, but it's like, this is the credit for them having the depth prepared, and it's indicative of how they should have done better this season, and this is a great preview for the year to come, and result flips and some things are different. We say, okay, well, now it's a 1 game outlier where the roster was totally different. So, you can't really use it to judge the rest of the season previously, and you can't use it to necessarily to super accurately project the next season coming. There are things you can take away from it. It's like, okay, this thing is nice. This thing is okay. This thing needs to be fixed, like the offensive line. Safety play is pretty good. So, Davion Crouch had a really good game, I thought. So, things you can pick out, but, let's not overinflate the importance of this, because it is a one-off thing in a weird situation where you're playing a team that you have never played and might not play for a very long time.
And so that's kind of our ending thoughts there. And if you want to follow me on Twitter at AJBlack247, if you want me to actually go full red on rage on you, tell me that this is the reason of this. The takeaway from this game is that Bill O'Brien is the exact same coach as Jeff Hafley, because I've had that at me a few times and I wanted to blow a gasket. You can also do that at Mitchell T. Wolf. Mitch, where else can you find some of your work?
You can do all that on Twitter. You can do Eagle Insider. Like I said, I'm waiting for the film to come in. We'll do a full analysis of everything that happened in this game. Talk about if there were open receivers being missed. We'll try to break down kind of the issues in pass protection, why BC was struggling with the run game, why they weren't able to get home with the pass rush. And we'll talk about maybe some of the penalties and stuff like that. But, check that stuff out. And then obviously we'll start getting into the retrospectives of the season, looking at some stats, looking at some film, see where we can use, again, the majority of the roster that will be returning next year to project what BC could be like in 2025.
And I'll be back tomorrow to talk about my thoughts on bowl games and baseball stadiums. I'll talk about Jack Conley's decision to opt out and a whole lot more. Maybe there'll be some transfer portal news that we can talk to about as well. Make sure to follow me and check out everything Eagle Insider, and make sure you subscribe and like this podcast. We are up over 20. We have over 2,000 subscribers now, and it's all because of you, the listeners who have made Locked On Boston College your first listen every day. For Mitch, this is AJ. Have a good one.